Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. The Temple family were highly respected in their community, especially David, who was a standout athlete. As captain of the KD high school football team, he led them to an undefeated season in 1986 as their star linebacker and defensive leader. His exceptional skills on the field earned him recognition far beyond his hometown, making him a local celebrity in Katy, with many seeking to befriend him. David's success prompted him to pursue higher education and athletics at Stephen F. Austin State University in the fall of 1990. The university offered him a full scholarship to play football, which he gladly accepted. During his time at the university, David's performance on the field was remarkable. His physical presence and relentless aggression earned him the nickname the Temple of Doom. David met Belinda Lucas, a physical education major and assistant with the football program while at university. Their connection was instant, and their friendship quickly turned into true love. Belinda, a charming blonde, captivated David with her beauty. From the start of their relationship, David was eager to spend all his time with her, often leaving heartfelt notes on her car windshield and surprising her with roses. After 11 months, David decided to take their relationship further. He asked Belinda's parents for their permission to marry her, which they happily granted due to his genuine character and respectful nature. David planned a romantic proposal, taking Belinda to the football field. As they walked to the 50-yard line, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. David got down on one knee and asked Belinda to marry him. Overjoyed, Belinda agreed to be his wife in the fall of 1992. David and Belinda tied the knot in an intimate ceremony surrounded by their closest friends and family members. Following their wedding, the couple decided to make Katy, Texas, their home. Belinda pursued her passion for education by taking up a teaching position at Katy High School, which happened to be David's alma mater. Meanwhile, David found his calling as a coach and teacher at Hastings High School. As the years passed, David and Belinda's desire to start a family grew stronger. 3 years after their marriage, Belinda gave birth to their son, Evan. Becoming parents brought immense joy to both of them. According to those closest to David, he was an exemplary husband, always supportive of Belinda and ensuring she had everything she needed in all aspects of their life. Friends and acquaintances of the couple reported a different side to their marriage. They witnessed David's controlling behavior towards Belinda, including his degrading comments about her body and her parenting. He would often make jokes about her weight, specifically her big butt, and frequently called her fat and ugly. He also insulted her family, referring to them as crazy white trash. David actively worked to hinder Belinda and their son Evan from spending time with her family. David's frustration with Belinda's physical appearance, particularly after her pregnancy, was evident. He seemed displeased that she had let herself go and was unhappy with her weight gain. Despite his flaws, it was clear that David loved and adored their son Evan and was a devoted and caring father. David drifted from wife Belinda over time. At his high school reunion, he reconnected with an old flame and confessed to a fling. He started spending more time away, telling Belinda he was at happy hour with coaches, but secretly frequented dance clubs for casual encounters, leaving Belinda uneasy about their marriage. As Belinda spent time with her son, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. She shared her suspicions with her friends, wondering if David might be having an affair. However, she was hesitant to believe her own thoughts, thinking there must be a logical reason for David's increased absence from home. When Belinda went through their credit card statements, she grew concerned as she noticed numerous charges from upscale nightclubs, making her question David's activities. Confronting him about these outings, he gave weak excuses, which Belinda reluctantly accepted. After this incident, David told Belinda he no longer wanted to share a credit card account with her and opened his own instead. This development further fueled Belinda's concerns, leaving her feeling disconnected from her husband. By the summer of 1998, Belinda and David's relationship was strained, and they frequently argued. They would often go long periods without speaking to each other, adding more stress to their relationship. One evening, Belinda decided to confront David about their issues. She asked him if he still loved her, but he gave a vague response, saying he wasn't sure. However, by the next morning, everything had changed. David had a change of heart and told Belinda he did love her. Belinda was overjoyed when she heard his words. By January 1999, David and Belinda's relationship appeared to have improved. Belinda was overjoyed to discover she was pregnant with their second child, a baby girl, and this news filled them with excitement. At 8 months pregnant, Belinda received a call on January 11th, 1999, from Evan's daycare center, saying he had a fever and needed to be picked up at lunchtime. Belinda drove to the center, collected Evan, and took him home. Their son was 4 years old at the time. David arrived home about 30 minutes later, and Belinda had to leave for a meeting she couldn't miss. Belinda returned home from her meeting at around 3:45 p.m., clearly exhausted. David decided to take Evan out to give Belinda a break. They left the house at 4 p.m. and drove to a nearby park. However, they didn't stay there for long, and David decided to drive to a larger park several miles away. On his way home, David stopped at Brookshire Brothers to buy a drink for his son and some cat food. However, by the time he got to the store, it was already after 4:30 p.m., so he decided not to take Evan to the larger park. Instead, he headed back home. While driving home, David decided to make a quick stop at Home Depot to buy brackets for the baby's nursery shelving. The store's CCTV cameras captured David and his son entering the store. David arrived home with Evan at 5:30 p.m. As he approached the back door, he noticed it was partially open and there was glass everywhere. This immediately raised his suspicions, and he suspected that the house had been robbed. Thinking quickly, David picked up his son and ran to the neighbor's house, banging on their front door and shouting to let him in. The neighbor, hearing the commotion, quickly ran to the front door. David handed his son over to the neighbor and asked him to call 911 urgently, explaining that it looked like his house had been burglarized. Worried about his pregnant wife, David left his son with the neighbor and rushed back to his home. As he rushed inside, he shouted Belinda's name, his voice filled with concern. He ran up the stairs to the master bedroom, where he found Belinda lying in the closet, covered in blood. After David found Belinda's body, he phoned the police. 2 officers from the Harris County Constable's office rushed to the scene in response to 911 calls reporting a shooting. En route, they learned that someone had been shot. When they arrived, they were blocked by David and Belinda's dog, Shaka, who was barking and growling fiercely, preventing them from entering. Just as the officers were about to act, David emerged from the backyard. He calmly and firmly told the officers that his wife Belinda had been shot and was dead inside. The officers ordered David to control his dog before they could enter. David complied, putting the dog in the garage. David was placed in a patrol vehicle, and medical personnel and additional officers arrived. However, David became agitated in the patrol car. The officers explained that they needed to take him to the police station for questioning about his wife Belinda's death. During the interview, David discussed the events leading up to his discovery of his wife's lifeless body in the closet. However, the detectives noted that David became irritated and aggressive, refusing to maintain eye contact and exhibiting restless behavior, such as shaking his body and bouncing in his chair as he spoke. After 3.5 hours of questioning, the detectives remained uncertain whether David was a suspect in his wife's murder, as his responses were unclear and he was uncooperative, making it impossible to rule him out as a suspect. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators were met with a horrific sight. Belinda was found lying face down in the master bedroom closet, having suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Initially, the severity of the injury was not apparent due to her long hair covering the affected area. One detective at the scene believed Belinda may have been kneeling when she was shot. The clothes in the closet were splattered with Belinda's blood and brain matter. Belinda was found fully clothed in jeans and a sweater, with her shoes, watch, bracelet, necklace, and rings still on. An autopsy was performed on her body on January 12, 1999, revealing that she had been fatally shot by a 12-gauge shotgun, which fractured her skull. The medical examiner concluded that Belinda's death occurred on January 11th, although the exact time of death could not be pinpointed due to the body's advanced state of lividity by the time it was removed from the crime scene. Additionally, the autopsy revealed that Belinda's unborn daughter would have also died as a result of the gunshot wound to her head, although the death would not have been instantaneous. An investigation of David and Belinda's home uncovered evidence that the shooter had entered through the back patio door, which had a broken panel of glass. However, the pattern of the broken glass suggested that the window was broken while the door was already open, raising suspicions about the circumstances of the break-in. The investigators' analysis led them to conclude that if the back door had been closed when the glass was broken, they would have expected the glass fragments to be scattered closer to the couch. However, the fact that the glass fragments were found in the living room suggests an alternative scenario. It raises questions about the intruder's intentions. Why would they break the glass of an already unlocked and open door when drawers were pulled out and some items were turned over in the home if their goal was to gain entry? After a thorough investigation, it was found that nothing of value was missing. Belinda still had all her jewelry on, indicating that she was not targeted for her possessions. Moreover, David's gold championship high school football ring was left in plain sight on the dresser, and the television was still plugged in, contradicting the notion of a robbery. Given these observations, detectives initially thought the murder of Belinda was staged to look like a robbery. But after further investigation, they realized the true motive was to specifically target and kill Belinda and her unborn child. The break-in was solely to execute Belinda and her unborn daughter. Detectives checked David's alibi and reviewed security footage from Brookshire and Home Depot, which confirmed he was at both places when Belinda was likely killed. As a result, detectives temporarily ruled out David as a suspect and focused on other leads in his wife's murder. When police initially questioned David on the night of Belinda's murder, he claimed to have no idea who might have wanted to harm his wife. However, after a few days of investigation and careful thought, David told the detectives that one person came to mind who might have had a motive to harm Belinda, their 16-year-old neighbor, Riley Sanders. Riley was both a neighbor and a student of Belinda's at their local high school. Because of his frequent absences from her class, Belinda had met with Riley's parents several weeks before her murder to discuss the issue, and as a result, they had disciplined him. Moreover, Belinda had also confronted Riley's parents after he left beer cans in her backyard. The investigation revealed that Riley had access to his father's 12-gauge shotgun, which was the same weapon used to murder Belinda. Furthermore, the detectives discovered that a group of Riley's friends had been involved in a robbery several weeks earlier, during which several shotguns were stolen. During his interviews with the detectives about Belinda's murder, Riley told them what he did that day, saying he was in school. But when the detectives checked his attendance records, they found out he had skipped class in the middle of the day. This difference in what he said and what really happened made the detectives suspicious, and they started looking into whether Riley was involved in Belinda's murder. When they showed him the evidence, Riley agreed to take a lie detector test, but he failed it. Even so, Riley still said he didn't do it and didn't have any bad feelings towards Belinda. Instead, he said that on the day of Belinda's murder, he had skipped school with a friend, spent the day smoking marijuana, and then went to a few friends' houses. He fell asleep on his couch and didn't wake up until around 6 p.m. when he saw the police tape outside Belinda and David's home. While David suspected that his neighbor Riley was responsible for his wife's murder, the detectives couldn't find any concrete proof to link Riley to the crime. In fact, they confirmed Riley's alibi by interviewing his friends, which raised questions about David's theory. The detectives did consider the possibility that Riley might have killed Belinda and her unborn baby, but they kept their attention on David, Belinda's husband, as the main suspect in the investigation. During their inquiry, the detectives discovered that David was close to a colleague, Heather Scott, a teacher at his high school. David admitted to the detectives that he and Heather had exchanged flirtatious emails and had gone on happy hour outings together, but he claimed their relationship was purely platonic. The detectives questioned Heather multiple times. In their first interview, Heather said she and David had never been alone together, but described their interactions as casual and romantic. This raised suspicions with the detectives. After consulting a lawyer, Heather gave a second statement. In this statement, she revealed that her relationship with David was more significant than she initially claimed. She said they spent New Year's Eve together at her house and had intimate relations. When the detectives asked David about the alleged New Year's Eve encounter with Heather, his co-worker, David admitted it, rather than denying it to protect his pregnant wife, Belinda. David insisted Heather meant nothing to him, saying their connection was purely physical and that he enjoyed the attention. David claimed he truly loved Belinda and would do anything for her. He admitted hurting Belinda by having an affair, but denied physically harming her. 3 months after Belinda's murder, a grand jury gathered and decided not to indict Riley Sanders or David Temple for her murder. Despite this, detectives remained convinced of David's guilt, but they lacked sufficient evidence to link him to the crime. Over the next few years, the investigation into Belinda's murder stagnated, and the case remained unsolved. David moved on with his life, remarrying to Heather Scott. Although David was never charged with a crime related to Belinda's murder, her family remained convinced of his guilt. They made efforts to keep Belinda's memory alive, including erecting a giant billboard over a busy highway and bringing news crews to her gravesite to raise awareness about her case. However, despite their efforts, nothing seemed to change and the tip lines fell silent, with leads drying up. It seemed Belinda's murder would remain unsolved. But everything changed in November 2004 when Scott Peterson was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife Lacey in California, more than 5 years after Belinda's death. This conviction sparked renewed interest in Belinda's case, as prosecutors in Katy, Texas, believed there were numerous similarities between Lacey Peterson's murder and Belinda Temple's. The state had previously secured a guilty verdict against Scott without relying on forensic evidence. Although Texas prosecutors believed David was responsible for Belinda's death, they lacked physical evidence linking him to the crime. The prosecution used Scott's conviction as a precedent to re-examine Belinda's case, aiming to find sufficient evidence to charge David with murder. According to the prosecution's theory, Belinda returned home on January 11, 1999, where David lay in wait, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun. They alleged that David confronted Belinda, forcing her upstairs into a closet where he shot her fatally in the head. After the homicide, the prosecution believed David staged the scene to look like a botched burglary, took his son, and drove around town to create an alibi, which was captured on 2 security cameras. On November 30, 2004, David Temple was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife Belinda 6 years after her death. Despite the arrest, the case was delayed for 3 years before going to trial. During this time, Heather was not charged with any crime related to Belinda's murder, and no evidence suggested she had prior knowledge of David's involvement. In 2007, David's trial began, and his defense team claimed that his 16-year-old neighbor, Riley Sanders, was responsible for the crime. However, the jury found David guilty after just 8 hours of deliberation and sentenced him to life in prison. But in 2016, the conviction was overturned due to the prosecution's failure to disclose crucial evidence. This led to a new trial in 2019, where David was again found guilty of murdering Belinda. Although the jury delivered a guilty verdict, the judge declared a mistrial because the jury could not agree on a sentence. The resentencing hearing was delayed, but it finally took place in 2023. After a few hours of deliberation, the jury found David guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Michelle Linehan. In 1994, Michelle Linehan, then known as Michelle Hughes, left Louisiana and moved to New York to work for a modeling agency. However, her stay in New York did not last long, and Michelle quickly changed her career path. When she moved to Alaska, she began working as a stripper at the Great Alaskan Bush Company, which not only brought in a substantial income, but also helped her attract the attention of many men who wanted to marry her here. Michelle continued this work for several months until she met Kent Leppink. Kent appeared modest and reserved, but Michelle's parents described him as impulsive and prone to losing control. Like Michelle, Kent was also trying to start over. After being caught stealing money from his family's business in Michigan, he fled to Alaska. Seeing it as the perfect place to leave his troubles behind, Kent believed meeting Michelle was fate. The two began dating immediately, and within a month, Kent proposed. However, Michelle wasn't in a hurry to give him an answer. When Kent introduced Michelle to his parents, they immediately noticed that she seemed distant toward him. When he hugged her, she instinctively pulled away, making it clear that Michelle didn't truly love Kent. His mother began to suspect that Michelle had been seeing other men, and what Kent's mother felt was right. When traveling salesman Scott Hilka met Michelle at the club in late 1994, he too fell in love with her. They quickly developed a deep relationship. Then, in the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin entered the picture. John, a single father who had recently lost his wife to cancer, although soon discovered Michelle's other relationships. He had already fallen in love with her and also proposed. Remarkably, both Kent and John, or the two men, were aware of each other for several months. John, Kent, and Michelle even lived in the same house in Anchorage. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a complex web of relationships. People at the strip club where Michelle worked believed she was simply skilled at manipulating others. She took full advantage of her relationships, receiving money, lavish gifts, and financial support from her admirers. Other dancers didn't find the gifts unusual, as club patrons often gave such presents to gain the women's attention. However, no one truly believed Michelle intended to marry any of these men. All of them were at least 10 years older than her, but she had a way of charming each one. She skillfully played her game, knowing exactly how to manipulate and control the men in her life. Michelle insisted that she never asked for more than what they were willing and able to give. Meanwhile, Kent remained hopeful and genuinely believed he was preparing for a wedding with Michelle. In preparation for this momentous occasion, Kent's father planned to travel to Anchorage in the spring of 1996 to meet his future daughter-in-law. However, shortly before his arrival, she suddenly disappeared. When Kent's father reached Anchorage, he found his son in a state of grief. After a brief visit, he returned to Michigan without fulfilling his purpose. On May 2, 1996, Kent's body was discovered along a deserted road. 80 miles south of Anchorage, he had been attacked 3 times, in the back, chest, and head. His body was found by accident when electricians working nearby noticed his bright red jacket. That same day, a letter arrived at his parents' home. The letter contained instructions that it should only be opened in the event of his death. When his parents received the letter, they immediately tried to contact him, but were unable to reach him. The exact time of Kent's death could not be determined. but forensic experts estimated that he had died 1 or 2 days before his body was discovered. Shell casings were found near the body, but the murder weapon was missing. When the Leppink family learned of the tragedy, Kent's mother immediately remembered the letter her son had left behind, still sealed as he had instructed at the same time. Investigators at the crime scene were unaware that critical evidence was not there, but was instead in the possession of Kent's parents. The letter said that if he died under suspicious circumstances, John, Michelle, or Scott Hilke could be held responsible. He also requested one more thing, which was to ensure that Michelle would spend a long time in prison. Kent clearly suspected Michelle and one of her lovers of plotting to kill him. His parents immediately contacted the police and handed over the letter he had written. When detectives opened the envelope, they quickly realized that this case would be anything but straightforward. The letter provided critical clues and leads, prompting them to thoroughly investigate everyone involved in the love triangle. Scott said he was surprised to learn he was being investigated. As he was not in Alaska at the time of the murder, investigators reviewed all airline and phone records and determined that Scott was not in Alaska, so he was cleared of any involvement in Kent's death the following day. Detectives questioned a woman, Kent's close friend. At the police station, she broke down in tears upon learning that Kent had been violently killed. During her questioning, she revealed that Kent owned a weapon and mentioned a significant detail. Kent had a $1 million life insurance policy, with Michelle listed as the beneficiary. This could be Michelle's motive for harming Kent. However, investigators discovered that just days before his death, Kent had removed Michelle as the beneficiary. Meanwhile, Michelle was unaware and still had a motive for the murder. A few days after Kent's body was found, police searched his car and discovered another envelope in the glove compartment. This letter seemed to be a correspondence between Michelle and John Carlin. In it, they discussed how John had supposedly bought a cabin at Lake Tahoe and invited Michelle to spend the weekend there. However, detectives uncovered that John hadn't actually purchased any property. It was a lie. The whole situation seemed staged, as if John and Michelle were exchanging messages designed for Kent to find. The letter appeared intended to provoke Kent's jealousy and prompt him to travel to the lake, near where Kent's body was found. But why would they do this? Was it a trap to lure Kent? According to the police, the plan seemed to have worked. Kent had apparently become jealous, and it all ended with 3 weapon wounds. The problem was that this was all based on speculation. No concrete evidence, no witnesses, and not even the murder weapon. A few months into the investigation, the lead investigators were reassigned to another precinct, causing the case to lose momentum and eventually come to a complete halt despite several pieces of circumstantial evidence. No charges were ever filed. At the time, Hilke was living in California. Carlin and Michelle each left shortly after the murders. Michelle settled in Olympia, Washington, seemingly starting a new life and leaving her past behind. After moving to Olympia, Michelle began attending college, pursuing studies in biology and psychology. She later earned a master's degree in public administration. In 1998, she married a young doctor named Colin Linehan in New Orleans, and they welcomed a daughter a year later. In 2004, a new cold case unit was formed in Alaska to reopen unsolved cases. The 8-year-old crime quickly became a priority. As evidence strongly pointed toward Michelle and John, Michelle became the main suspect in planning the murder, while John was believed to be the one who pulled the trigger. For 8 years, the case remained inactive until new detectives showed up at Michelle's suburban home. They asked her to clarify some statements she had made following the murder. By then, Michelle was no longer working as a stripper. She admitted that she had only viewed the job as a temporary way to make money and had left it behind as soon as she could. Colin, a successful physician, was just as shocked as Michelle when the police arrived at their door. By that time, they had been together for 6 years and were living a stable, fulfilling life that seemed to embody The American dream, however, this perfect image was now in jeopardy in Olympia. Michelle's friends were stunned to learn that behind her image as a perfect mother, churchgoer, parent-teacher committee member, businesswoman, and devoted wife, there was a tumultuous past. Authorities began preparing to seize several personal computers used by Michele, although much of the data on the computers had been deleted. Investigators managed to recover a significant portion. Among the restored files were emails and correspondence between Michelle, Kent, John, and Scott Hilke. It became clear that Michele had captivated the hearts of all three men, telling each one he was the most important person in her life while dismissing the others as mere toys to cover her expenses. These revelations exposed the manipulative dynamics of their relationships, but did not provide enough solid evidence to charge her with murder. There were, however, incriminating findings in the case. Investigators focused on a letter sent the day before the murder, which discussed Seychelles, a country offering citizenship for a substantial fee. The key detail in the letter was Michelle's question about whether Seychelles had an extradition agreement with the U.S. and if it would extradite criminals. However, this alone was not enough to press charges, adding to the complexity. The murder weapon was identified as a .44 caliber Desert Eagle, a distinctive weapon initially. John denied ever owning such a weapon, however. A surprising witness came forward, John's son, who was a child at the time of the crime but had grown into an adult by 2005. He decided to assist in the investigation of this decades-old case, which he had partially witnessed. The son revealed that shortly before the murder, his father had purchased a weapon after seeing a newspaper ad. He claimed to have seen the weapon the day after Kent was killed. It was in the bathroom sink, being cleaned with some kind of chemical, and his father appeared to be handling it carefully. The son could not identify the weapon's model or describe its appearance in this tangled love triangle orchestrated by the dancer. It seemed possible that John had been the one to acquire the weapon from the beginning of the investigation. Michele insisted that she was cooperating with law enforcement and denied any involvement in Kent's death. By the fall of 2006, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to charge both Michele and John Carlin with first-degree murder. Michele was able to post bail immediately and return to her family in Washington while awaiting trial. Although she was required to wear an ankle monitor and adhere to strict restrictions, John, however, was denied bail and spent 6 months in custody before the trial, maintaining his innocence throughout. In court, the prosecutors portrayed Michele as a cunning manipulator who sought to profit from the romantic entanglements she had created. Michele's attorneys argued that the case against her was based entirely on circumstantial evidence, giving them hope for a favorable verdict. John's legal team, on the other hand, shifted suspicion to others, even accusing John's own son, who had testified against him. They claimed Michele was the true mastermind behind the murder, a manipulative seductress who orchestrated the crime, possibly by court, convincing someone else to carry it out. The defense proposed several theories, including the claim that Michele herself had killed Kent, one of her lovers. To collect a $1 million insurance payout, the prosecution argued that John had spent a large amount of money on Michelle, whom he deeply loved, when one of her other lovers pulled away. They claimed the only obstacle between John and his happiness with Michelle was Kent. Prosecutors alleged that John and Michelle had crafted a plan involving a fake letter to lure Kent to the location where he was murdered. Asserting that this letter had set the crime into motion, John contended that the letter was merely a joke created by Michelle to make Kent jealous and end their relationship. The prosecution went on to present Michelle's exchanges with her lovers, including one between her and John, who stated that he would do anything for her, even risk his life. To the prosecution, this suggested that her lovers might have been willing to commit murder for her. They also highlighted emails referencing the Seychelles and escaping justice, which they argued reinforced their case. The defense countered that, aside from circumstantial evidence, most of the emails were vague and open to multiple interpretations. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found John Carlin guilty of first-degree murder. John was sentenced to 99 years in prison when Michelle's trial began. She claimed that she never considered Kent her fiancé, as she had repeatedly turned down his marriage proposals and had agreed only to marry Scott. However, Scott and Michelle's relationship fell apart before the crime occurred. The defense argued that Kent had significant personal issues. Claiming he had become a nuisance to Michelle, they alleged that he stalked her, monitored her every move, gathered information about her bank accounts and phone records, knew her social security number, and even read her emails. Over time, Michelle reportedly realized he was stalking her and began to fear him. She supported these claims, which angered Kent's parents, who accused her of distorting the story. Michelle's defenders also described Kent as an unusual individual who had been struggling with mental health problems. They attributed the disturbing letters he sent home to his mental state at the time. The defense attempted to clarify Kent's misconceptions regarding his relationship with Michelle. He was fully preparing for a wedding despite her refusal. In the end, it was supposedly too difficult for him to acknowledge that he had been so mistaken, and thus, revenge seemed like a viable option to him. However, the defense argued that this did not make Michelle a bad person, let alone a murderer. They also raised concerns about the email exchanges, contending that it was inappropriate to edit or delete portions of the messages to leave only incriminating statements. The defense further disputed the assertion that Michelle had committed the crime or that she was the mastermind behind it. Under Alaska law, if it could be proven that Michelle was involved in planning the murder, her actions would legally be considered equivalent to pulling the trigger. Even the attorneys expressed concerns that Michelle's past might prevent the jury from recognizing her as the educated wife and mother she had become. Surprisingly, a former dancer who had worked with Michelle at a club testified for the prosecution. This witness kept a detailed diary in which she noted the favorite films of her friends and acquaintances. She claimed that Michelle was particularly obsessed with the 1994 film, The Last Seduction, a story that paralleled Kent's case. In the movie, the female protagonist manipulates her lover into killing her husband to collect insurance money. The witness asserted that Michelle often referred to this film as her favorite, admired the lead character, and aspired to be like her. The defense disputed the testimony, stating that Michelle did not have access to a weapon matching the one used in the crime. Additionally, the defense argued that Michelle had taken steps to remove herself from Kent's insurance policy shortly before the murder. The prosecution countered this claim, arguing that Michelle was not canceling her involvement, but merely clarifying beneficiary details. However, Kent had already changed the beneficiaries before his death, leaving Michelle with nothing. During the hearings, Michelle remained calm and chose not to testify before the jury, consistently asserting her innocence and claiming she had nothing to hide. The defense presented her husband, Colin, as a key witness to challenge the claim that Michelle could be a murderer or the mastermind behind the crime. Colin played a crucial role in defending Michelle's character, which the prosecution had tried to tarnish. He shared that, although he was aware of Michelle's past work as a stripper, he admired her determination to take that job to pay for college and create a better future for herself. The defense argued that the prosecution's case against Michelle relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked any concrete proof. The trial lasted 5 weeks, followed by 2 days of jury deliberation. On October 22, 2007, Michelle was convicted of first-degree murder. The verdict was devastating for Michelle. Her fiancé Colin and their daughter, Kent's relatives, feel relieved and partially fulfill Kent's last wish before he was killed. Michelle's attorney, however, was determined to keep fighting. The defense team filed an appeal, focusing on the missing murder weapon and the questionable evidence used to convict her, the rare weapon believed to have been used to kill Kent could potentially exonerate her, but it had not been found even more than a decade after the crime, after John Carlin began serving his sentence. He reportedly admitted to owning a weapon matching the description, a Desert Eagle of the same caliber as the murder weapon. John claimed he had lied earlier out of fear, believing he was being hunted and would be jailed based on his testimony, according to him. His weapon went missing shortly before the crime, but later reappeared. He explained that he had been forced to clean it with a chemical solution to remove fingerprints and then disposed of it by throwing it into a garbage container. All the while, John continues to insist that he did not kill Kent. After the hearings, Michelle was sent to a women's prison in Alaska, where she awaited sentencing. She was eventually sentenced to 99 years in prison. During this time, Michelle's husband frequently traveled to Alaska to visit her, striving to support both her and their family. 2 years later, Michelle's attorney successfully overturned her first-degree murder conviction. A significant development arose when John Carlin, who had been beaten to death in a lodge prison fight in 2008, while his appeal was still pending, became central to the case since Michelle's conviction had been primarily based on John's testimony. The court dismissed the case following his death. This marked a turning point in Michelle's favor. On February 5, 2010, the Alaska Court of Appeals overturned Michelle's conviction. While awaiting a retrial, Michelle was released on $250 bail. During the retrial, the prosecution was prohibited from referencing her previous conviction, the movie, or the victim's letters, as these were deemed speculative. As a result, the case against Michelle began to look much weaker. Kent's parents attended the hearings and were shocked to learn of Michelle's release on December 13, 2011. Anchorage Superior Court Judge Philip Volland dismissed the murder charge against Michelle. Due to the prosecution's inability to prove her guilt, Michelle resumed her life in Washington, where she now runs a laser surgery clinic after John Carlin's death in prison. His son filed a lawsuit against the state of Alaska and received $160 in compensation for his father's death. Kent's father passed away in 2014, but Kent's mother continues to visit Alaska. She considers it the only place where she feels close to her son and remains committed to seeking justice. Each visit, however, reminds her of the guilt she feels for being unable to fulfill Kent's final wish, as described in his letters. In the end, no one was ever held accountable for Kent's murder.
Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lynn Hernan. In Wisconsin, USA, there is a small town with a population of around 15,000, located near Milwaukee. On October 3, 2018, the tranquility of this town was shattered when Jesse Kerchevsky, the caregiver for Lynn Hernan, called 911. Jesse reported finding 62-year-old Lynn. There was no sign of life in her apartment, sitting in a reclined position amid a mess of scattered medications. Jesse informed the dispatcher that Lynn had been experiencing severe stomach pains for several months, which had been worsening over time. This pain may have led Lynn to take a lethal dose of medications. When emergency services arrived, the doctors confirmed Lynn Hernan's death, which was presumed to be due to poisoning. It was essential to perform all necessary tests, including toxicology, to determine the cause of Lynn's death. They took her to the forensic experts table, where blood was drawn, tissue samples were examined, and an unusual finding was a very high level of tetrazolline A. While this substance is found in certain drugs, none of the tablets located around the body contained it. As it turns out, tetrazolline A is found in some eye drops sold without a prescription, which are used to relieve eye redness and inflammation. This is particularly useful for allergic reactions and mild eye fatigue, and a few drops are typically sufficient. While these eye drops are safe when applied to the eyes, they can be harmful and even dangerous if ingested, especially in large amounts.
Ingesting a significant quantity can lead to serious consequences, including vomiting, internal bleeding, memory loss, and even death at high doses. This thing aligns with the nurse's description of the prolonged suffering from stomach pain experienced by Lynn. The medical examiner's court was alarmed by the unusual circumstances surrounding Lynn's death, as there are much less painful and quicker ways to die. At 62, she likely did not want to endure suffering for months before dying. It appeared that her pain was due to a gradual increase in tetrazolin levels in her blood. Based on this, the experts suggested that she might have been murdered. After reviewing the autopsy report, detectives concurred and initiated a criminal investigation. Lynn Hernan had no children and had outlived all her relatives. The first person police contacted to gather details about her death, even before the toxicology report was complete, was her nurse, 39 years old Jessie Krachevsky. Jessie had been caring for Lynn, who lived alone, for several years, and their relationship was described as friendly. Lynn saw Jessie not just as a nurse, but as a true confidant. About 5 years prior to the incident, Lynn struggled with both physical and mental health issues, including depression and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So she needed to be supervised, however, but no one in her family could help her. She dealt with several illnesses, but the most agonizing was her stomach pain. In the final months of her life, she could only consume soup due to intestinal problems. Jessie carefully overseen her diet and medication. Following the incident, Jessie was promptly called to the police station for questioning. Forensic experts were analyzing the body and gathering materials for a toxicology test. Initially, it seemed that police was simply obtaining information from Jessie. However, it quickly became clear that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. During the inquiry, both Jessie and her mother, Jennifer Flower, were present. Jessie's mother was worried because she believed her daughter might be in danger. She felt the detectives were overly focused on Jessie and might be trying to accuse her of murder. Ironically, her concerns only increased suspicion towards Jessie instead of alleviating it. The police tried to clarify with Jessie the cause that led to Lynn's tragic end. They questioned Jessie about why Lynn chose to end her life in such a dramatic manner. At this time, no one doubted Jessie's account. She genuinely believed Lynn had died by taking a lethal dose of drugs voluntarily. However, Jessie's behavior has made the police suspicious. Detectives were trying to determine if there were any underlying factors related to Lynn's death, such as a depressive state. They wondered if she had previously attempted to end her life and what could have caused the severe stomach pains she experienced. However, Jessie was unable to provide any answers. It appeared that she was not only grieving the loss of her employer but also withholding important information. Ultimately, Jessie was released due to a lack of evidence. The investigators were awaiting the official conclusions from a forensic expert following a toxicological examination. After the police became suspicious of Nurse Jennifer, they began to keep an eye on her mother, Jennifer. They interviewed Jennifer and learned that she had been a close friend of Lynn. She had helped her daughter, Jessie, secure a job with Lynn's home. Together, they provided care for Lynn, assisted Lynn in DA-Lynn-G with age-related issues, care, and providing everything else needed. However, Jennifer also raised suspicions among the police. At this time, the toxicology results appear to be particularly worrying. Given Lynn's age and health issues, it was unlikely that she had been ingesting eye drops orally for an extended period. Investigators needed to figure out how such a large quantity of the drug ended up in her system. Experts indicated that a lethal dose of the substance would require at least 4 bottles, while the results suggested Lynn had consumed at least 6 bottles, which should have led to severe stomach cramps and pain before her death. Shortly after Lynn's death, an unusual situation arose. Jessie and Jennifer purchased a new, large, and expensive television, even though their income was modest. Additionally, the police found the car that Lynn had given to her nurse, Jessie, to be suspicious. Investigators noted the peculiar behavior of Jessie and Jennifer, which increasingly suggested that Lynn's death was not voluntary. Typically, criminals attempt to cover up their actions and hide evidence to evade justice, but this situation appeared to be different. Besides, Jessie and Jennifer showed no signs of grief. Instead, they seemed to revel in the inheritance, which deepened the suspicions against them. The police began to suspect that Jessie might have orchestrated the murder. Jennifer did not have regular access to Lynn's apartment, but Jessie visited Lynn almost daily, allowing her easy access to Lynn's food and medicine. Jessie insisted that she truly loved Lynn and wanted to help Lynn. The two had become like family. However, the detective suspected that Lynn had made a serious mistake by allowing someone who could potentially harm her into her life. The suspects, Jessie and Jennifer, stayed attentive to the investigation, frequently calling the police station to check on the case's progress. The detectives realized that Jessie and Jennifer weren't genuinely concerned about what had happened. Rather, they were worried about being found out. Their behavior indicated they were closely monitoring the investigation. More evidence of Jessie and Jennifer's involvement and a thorough investigation were necessary to ensure justice. Jessie and her mother noticed that the police had taken a greater interest in their activities. During each visit to the station, Jessie felt compelled to defend herself. She said had a close relationship with Lynn and they treated each other like family. Jessie argued that any suspicions against her were baseless, insisting it was just a coincidence that she was a nurse and always in close contact with Lynn. Being a nurse did not make her a killer, but the detectives relied on more than just assumptions. Initially, Jessie did not mention on the increased levels of tetrazolina found in Lynn's blood. However, when she was cornered, she revealed that Lynn frequently used these eye drops and might have applied them without realizing it. Jessie attributed this to Lynn's cognitive issues, which sometimes caused her to lose control over her actions. However, the police quickly identified a key witness named Andrew Pooh. Although he was not related to Lynn, he described their relationship as close and friendly. Lynn had lived with Andrew's family, and he saw Lynn as his grandmother, she even helping him financially during his college years. Since she had no children, Lynn wanted to leave Andrew an inheritance, but he declined to avoid any suspicion of wanting money. Despite his refusal, Lynn insisted on naming him as her heir since she had no other beneficiaries. However, they never had the chance to finalize this arrangement. According to Andrew, Lynn had proposed leaving him an inheritance between $10,000 and $50,000. He frequently visited Lynn and knew Jessie, her nurse. Andrew suspects that Lynn's death may have been related to Jessie's fear of losing her inheritance, especially since she knew that Lynn intended to leave her fortune to Andrew. After Lynn passed away, Jessie unexpectedly inherited all of Lynn's property, which raised suspicions. Andrew approached Jessie hoping to receive part of the inheritance, but she claimed that Lynn had many debts and hadn't paid her bills for a long time. As a result, Jessie said most of the inheritance would go towards settling those debts. This led Andrew decided to consult lawyers to verify this information. After that, Jessie got in touch and arranged to meet with Andrew. She gave him documents that she proved Lynn's debt had been repaid. After settling all debts, Jessie said she had only $26,000 left and offered to share it with Andrew. However, when the police investigated, they discovered that these documents were fake, created using a computer program. It turned out Jessie hadn't paid anyone. This discovery led investigators to take a closer look at Lynn's financial situation. They quickly learned that during her time as a nurse, Jessie had conducted suspicious transactions involving Lynn's finances. She applied for a loan to the bank, the application was approved, and as a result the loan was disbursed. Even though the loans were in Lynn's name, Jessie was the one who actually used the funds. Ultimately, it was revealed that over the years, she had taken out about $300 in loans, of which only $88 was left by the time of the police investigation. In response to the financial claims made by the police officers, Jessie maintained that she acted at Lynn's request. She stated that Lynn provided the necessary documents for the loans and frequently asked her to purchase eye drops. Jessie mentioned that she had 4 bottles on hand, which Lynn had given her, and noted that she saw Lynn using the product correctly. She insisted that she did not supervise this process. However, police were skeptical of her account. At the crime scene, there were no eye drop bottles found near the body. Instead, pills were littered around, and no traces of those pills were found in Lynn's body. Lynn was said to have kept her bottle of eye drops on her nightstand, but a thorough search of the apartment revealed they were missing. The situation became increasingly complicated, suggesting that someone had staged the scene. It appeared that it had been discarded to hide evidence. The forensic expert believed that Lynn had been ingesting the eye drops for an extended period, leading to poisoning, severe pain, and ultimately death. It seemed unlikely that Lynn could have used such a large quantity on her own. This indicates that someone has poisoned her. Jessie, who spent the most time with Lynn and managed her diet and medications, emerged as the primary suspect. Suspicious thing, the detectives did not contact Jessie or summon her for questioning. Instead, she frequently visited the police station to ask about the investigation's progress. Jessie maintained that she had no motive to harm Lynn and denied any involvement in financial fraud. However, the circumstances surrounding the drugs continued to trouble the investigators, who began to apply pressure on Jessie. She shared bizarre stories about how Lynn supposedly enjoyed mixing vodka with eye drops, claiming this gave Lynn extra enjoyment from the drink. Jessie insisted she was unaware that regular eye drops could be dangerous and viewed it as just one of Lynn's eccentric habits. Jessie stated that on that fateful morning, she brought 4 additional bottles of eye drops to the Lynn's apartment and claimed that Lynn even mixed them into her water. This situation continued for about 6 months until a tragic conclusion, making the story increasingly bizarre. Despite the circumstantial evidence gathered by investigators, detectives believed Jessie was fabricating excuses. Ultimately, they decided to arrest Jessie on suspicion of premeditated murder. Evidence from the crime scene, including Jessie's cell phone, was sent for analysis, which provided the police with more information. They discovered that Jessie was in regular contact with her boyfriend, Scott Craig. The conversations between Jessie and Scott particularly caught the attention of police. It became evident that Jessie's assertion of being unaware of the dangers of ingesting eye drops was untrue. She had been researching this information online for some time. By the time she started caring for Lynn, she was already knowledgeable about products containing the harmful substance, suggesting she had intentionally chosen medications that contained it in high amounts. Jessie first considered using eye drops as a way to poison Lynn because they could be easily purchased without a prescription. All she needed to do was persuade Lynn to take them orally or secretly mix them into Lynn's food or drink. Due to Lynn's cognitive difficulty, so this seemed simple. From Jessie and Scott's conversations, it seemed he was unaware that Jessie was attempting to poison Lynn. However, a few months before the incident, a conversation revealed that Jessie had mentioned Lynn's serious illness, including episodes of vomiting blood, which led to Lynn being hospitalized. Doctors later reported that she had been poisoned. The investigation showed that Jessie must have known the consequences of her actions. The police looked into Scott's potential involvement and brought him in for questioning. He denied any knowledge of the poisoning plan but claimed that Jessie had informed him about Lynn's previous poisonings. Scott viewed Jessie as a pathological liar, and their relationship was close to ending. He thought Jessie fabricated the poisoning story to gain his sympathy and reconcile with him. During another conversation in September, Jessie claimed Lynn was hospitalized and on medication, stating that Lynn is in intensive care and is on life support machines. In reality, Lynn had already passed away. Scott was fed up with the relationship and wanted to end it that day. However, Jesse attempted to manipulate him again by claiming that Lynn was in the hospital, hoping to elicit his sympathy. She was trying to hold on to their relationship. The situation was complicated. Was it a fatal overdose, or a carefully planned scheme to obtain an inheritance? It turns out there was a clear motive in Jesse's actions. Over time, motivation will reveal itself. It is possible that Lynn found out about this, leading to her murder. Jesse then took possession of Lynn's property and money. Additionally, Jesse was desperate to keep her relationship with Scott, who had mentioned breaking up multiple times. Jesse concealed the true state of Lynn's, creating a web of lies that made it hard to uncover the truth. Investigators found that Jesse refused to admit her guilt. She maintained that Lynn consumed 100 liters of vodka daily and added eye drops to it. In October 2023, the investigation revealed the full extent of Jesse's financial fraud. It was found that since 2016, Lynn's credit limit had increased from almost $0 to $72,000. This was just the beginning. After her death, nearly $16,000 was stolen from her apartment, which was allegedly used to pay off some debts. Jesse claimed she only repaid loans that were in Lynn's name, but the source of these funds was traced. The total debts amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, taken out from banks under Lynn's name. Additionally, items worth $155 were stolen from Lynn's home. Initially, these items were reported missing, but it was later discovered that Jesse started receiving money in her accounts shortly thereafter, likely from the sale of Lynn's possessions. Lynn was a wealthy single woman who rarely used credit cards or loans. Additionally, the sudden rapid increase in debt that shortly after she hiring a new nurse, Jesse, seemed suspicious. Reports indicated that Jesse visited the casino every month, gambling large amounts with her boyfriend Scott, who didn't question where the money was coming from. They often went to gambling establishments at least twice a month. The investigation revealed that Jesse had a prior criminal record. Despite being young, she had a significant history of offenses, including document forgery, fraud, and gambling. Since 2010, Jesse struggled with a severe gambling addiction. In February of that year, she defrauded 2 individuals out of $4,000 by taking out loans in their names. Although she didn't use fake documents, it was shown that she obtained these funds through deceitful methods. By April 2010, she had lost over $45,000. During this time, she borrowed an additional $2,500 and applied for a loan exceeding $6,000, falsely claiming that her mother, Jennifer, had approved it by using her mother's documents. This was, of course, a lie. Jesse managed to secure over $6,500 in credit, using her mother's car as collateral, but she never repaid this amount. As a result, her mother nearly lost her car and had to gather a large amount of documentation to prove that she was not responsible for those loans. Jesse was imprisoned for 2 years but was released early due to good behavior. Her mother stated that she struggled with a severe gambling addiction. The prosecutor's office claimed that 25-year-old Jesse committed premeditated murder to gain financial benefits from her victim, Lynn. By doing so, she attempted to eliminate her own debts. It is alleged that she killed Lynn, who had endured pain and progressive for years, without considering the consequences. Jesse described the act as one of mercy, said that she could no longer bear to see Lynn suffer. The lawyers argued that Jesse did not kill Lynn. They explained that Lynn had cognitive impairments and did not understand the risks of type of eye drops she was taking. They stated that Lynn believed that drinking vodka mixed with eye drops would help her sleep better, leading her to use the drops without realizing the danger. According to the prosecution, on the day of the murder, Jesse provided Lynn with water that contained the contents of 6 eye drop bottles. However, the lethal dose was only 1 bottle. In court, both Jesse and Jennifer testified that Lynn consumed the water with the 6 bottles of drops. Initially, Jesse, who was a nurse, advised Lynn against using the drops, but after a lengthy argument, Jesse eventually relented, unaware of the severe outcomes that could result. Afterward, Jesse left for a few hours on business, not knowing how much of the substance Lynn had actually consumed or how it would affect her. Especially since Lynn had previously been hospitalized for poisoning from the drops. Lynn was aware of the dangers associated with eye drops, which made the idea of her accidental poisoning implausible. Jesse also knew about the harmful effects of these substances, and a key point against her was that no bottles of the eye drops were found near Lynn's body. It was evident that someone assisted Lynn in taking the medicine. The trial was intense and emotional, with the judge actively engaging in discussions. On November 14, 2023, the jury convicted Jesse of first-degree murder, theft, and concealment of evidence. Upon hearing the verdict, Jesse broke down in tears. She was sentenced to life in prison but could be eligible for parole after 40 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nancy Paola Reyes. Nancy Paola Reyes Gorsi was born on April 13, 1991, in Granados, Guatemala, to Jorge and Pren Gorsi, a poor family of 7. Despite their financial struggles, her parents were determined to provide their 5 children with a good education, hoping they would have better lives. Nancy excelled in school, which enabled her to enroll in the University of Villanova, where she earned a degree in business administration and document management with honors. However, her academic achievements did not immediately translate to career success. She worked part-time as a cashier and later became an administrator at a supermarket, but her professional growth stagnated. During her university years, Nancy was in an unregistered marriage with a man whose identity remains private, and they had 2 daughters together. Unfortunately, the relationship ended and the couple separated. The father of the children lost interest in their well-being and failed to provide financial support. Nancy lived with her parents and daughters, working at a supermarket with no clear future prospects. The family struggled financially, barely covering essential expenses. However, Nancy's older sister's decision to immigrate to the U.S. in 2013 changed everything. Her sister found a good job, got married, and settled down, inspiring Nancy to make a similar change. Instead of the U.S., Nancy chose to relocate to sunny Spain. The problem was that Nancy didn't have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone cover initial expenses. So she worked hard for several years, saving diligently until she finally had enough money to make her dream a reality. In July 2018, Nancy bought a ticket to Madrid, promising her parents she would stay in touch to alleviate their worries. Her plan was to find a place to live and a job upon arrival, with a few €1,000 to cover rent, food, and essentials until she could secure a steady income. When Nancy left, she was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. After a brief stay in Madrid, Nancy moved to Barcelona and later settled in Cádiz, the capital of the province of Cádiz, Spain. She kept in close touch with her family, calling home almost every day to check in on them and regularly sending money to support them. Over time, her remittances enabled her parents not only to support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Although Nancy didn't have a steady job, she made a living by doing odd jobs like cleaning houses for wealthy families and caring for the elderly and sick. Despite the challenges, Nancy never complained and was optimistic about her decision to move to Europe, where she believed she had more opportunities. She was convinced that she could never have earned as much back in Guatemala, even if she worked non-stop without days off. Nancy was pleased with her new life and even planned to bring her daughters to Spain once she had saved enough to rent a comfortable and spacious home for the whole family. Nancy initially kept her personal life private, citing her busy work schedule as the reason. However, in the spring of 2020, she confided in her parents about meeting Carlos Andres Bustamante, with whom she had begun a romantic relationship. The two had met by chance while Nancy was searching for a new place to live, and as they spent more time together, their relationship blossomed. They eventually moved in together, with Carlos being a year older than Nancy. At the start of their relationship, Carlos didn't have a steady income, relying on small, odd jobs to get by. As a result, Nancy became the primary breadwinner, covering their housing and bills, and often providing financial support for Carlos's personal expenses. Despite this, Nancy never expressed any concerns to her family, leading them to believe that she had found a loving and supportive partner. Nancy's two younger brothers had also relocated to Spain, and she remained in close contact with them, especially Dennis, the youngest, who had met Carlos and found him likable. In June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to Santander, a resort city on the Atlantic coast. When Nancy spoke with her family, she mentioned that the climate was warmer and there were more job opportunities. However, this was when problems in her relationship with Carlos started to emerge, which she tried to keep hidden. Carlos turned out to be jealous, hot-tempered, and even cruel. He had no career ambitions and was content to be supported by Nancy. Moreover, he struggled with alcohol abuse and occasionally used prohibited substances, despite repeatedly promising to quit and find a stable job. When Nancy discovered she was pregnant, she was already questioning whether to continue her life with Carlos. Carlos was overjoyed by the news and promised that their life would improve, but in reality, things only worsened. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from Nancy or asking his mother for it. Worse still, he began physically abusing Nancy, which she tried to conceal from everyone. On the evening of August 12th, a disturbing scene unfolded while Nancy was video chatting with her parents. Her partner, Carlos, suddenly burst into a fit of rage, yelling at Nancy and demanding to know who she was talking to. Refusing to believe her when she told him it was her mother, he snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by glancing at the screen, he carelessly tossed the device onto a chair and walked away. The very next day, a similar incident occurred. Carlos again wrestled the phone from Nancy's hands while she was speaking with her parents and daughters. He insisted on knowing who she was talking to, hurled insults at her, and even made threats. A terrified Nancy later attempted to downplay the situation to her relatives, attributing Carlos's behavior to excessive jealousy and assuring them that everything was under control. However, her concerned parents urged her to report the incidents to the police, but Nancy insisted on handling the matter herself. On August 17th, Nancy had a concerning phone conversation with her sister. She stated that if anything happened to her, Carlos would be responsible. Although her words were ominous, she didn't explain further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard from Nancy. Nancy vanished on August 20th around 2 p.m. She sent a text to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did. Her family tried contacting Carlos, but he didn't respond either. The situation was alarming because the couple had recently moved to Santander, had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country. A few days later, a suspicious message came from Carlos's phone, claiming that he and Nancy had argued and decided to separate. The message stated that Nancy had left to find a new apartment, ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she was. Nancy's brothers suggested that Carlos come to Ciudad Real to file a missing person report with them. Carlos agreed, but he never showed up, didn't file the report, and ceased communicating with the family. Nancy's relatives reached out to the police to file a report about her disappearance. In the meantime, Nancy's friends provided her brothers with the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, she became emotional and confessed that she had suspected her son might do something harmful to his partner, but she didn't provide any specific details. Sandra also claimed to have no knowledge about the whereabouts of her son and his fiancée. Although Carlos wasn't answering her calls, he sent her brief messages asking her to stop inquiring and to give him some time. Despite liking Nancy, Sandra was aware of her son's capabilities and understood his true nature. Sandra went to the police station the next day for questioning about Nancy's disappearance. She told the officers what she had already shared with Nancy's brothers: Carlos's troubling behavior and a lengthy text message from Nancy. In the message, Nancy warned Sandra not to give Carlos any money because he would waste it on alcohol and drugs, which made him aggressive and cruel. Nancy said Carlos had no intention of finding a job or overcoming his addictions, and his behavior had become increasingly threatening, making her consider leaving him. She believed it was better to end their relationship before someone got hurt. The investigation also uncovered some disturbing information about Carlos. He had been convicted of bodily harm multiple times, including brutally beating his own mother when he was 17. Although he only received probation at the time, he later served short sentences for assaulting women he lived with and had relationships with. The investigation into Carlos and Nancy's relationship revealed many red flags from the start. Carlos had a history of aggression, drug addiction, and a criminal record, which was compounded by his uncontrollable rage. Meanwhile, Nancy's friends disclosed that she was not just a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had claimed. Instead, she was providing escort services to wealthy clients in Santander, earning a substantial income. Carlos was aware of her occupation and initially accepted it, as it allowed him to avoid finding work himself. However, when Nancy became pregnant, Carlos's behavior became increasingly erratic. He grew suspicious about the child's paternity, wondering if it belonged to one of her clients. Additionally, he was consumed by jealousy, vacillating between preventing her from interacting with other men and forcing her to continue working to support them financially. Meanwhile, Carlos squandered the money he took from his mother on his own vices, leaving them struggling to make ends meet. After nearly a week of unexplained absence, Nancy and Carlos's whereabouts were unknown. Although Carlos had been in touch through messages, he never revealed his location. It wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a search warrant for the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. The discovery they made was gruesome and left no doubt that Nancy had met a tragic end. Bloodstains were found throughout the apartment, with some attempts made to clean them up, but most were still visible to the naked eye, including in the clogged bathroom and toilet drains. The police also found fragments of bones, hair, skin, and internal organs. Forensic analysis confirmed that these belonged to Nancy, even though her body was not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally killed, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos was quickly identified as the main suspect in the case due to evidence found in the apartment, including a package from a local hardware store with his fingerprints on it. The package was for a small hatchet, but the tool itself was not discovered. Further investigation revealed that Carlos had bought the hatchet, along with rubber gloves and large trash bags, at a nearby market on August 20th. This was confirmed by security footage from the store. An elderly vendor who sold Carlos a small cart also positively identified him from a photo. The day after the gruesome discovery in the apartment, Carlos surprisingly surrendered to a Madrid police station, attempting to shift suspicion away from himself. He claimed to be reporting Nancy missing, but was promptly arrested as the prime suspect in the heinous crime. Carlos professed his innocence, stating that he and Nancy had argued and parted ways on August 20th, after which he left town in an emotional state, unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to gather her belongings. However, Carlos's alibi seemed dubious, especially considering the police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. Despite conducting an extensive search of nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline with the help of divers, no trace of Nancy was found. To further investigate, The police tracked Carlos's movements from August 20th to 26th using his mobile phone signals, revealing that he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and visiting Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to conceal his activities, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel across the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage captured Carlos's movements on the evening of August 20th. He was seen walking towards a large forest park, but returned to his apartment late at night. He then left again, this time pushing a cart filled with unusual, oddly shaped bags. Since there were few cameras within the park, Carlos vanished from view once he entered the wooded area. Later, he re-emerged with the same cart, but it was now significantly lighter. He then proceeded towards the railway tracks, which were located near a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. After visiting this area, Carlos returned once more, but this time without the extra weight, providing law enforcement with a clear lead on where to search for the body. On September 16th, police discovered bags containing badly decomposed human remains in a heavily overgrown area on a hillside. The remains were identified as those of Nancy Gorcey, who had been dismembered into 20 parts using a hatchet. Although security camera footage showed everything Carlos had transported in a cart was recovered, one crucial item was still missing: the fetus of the 4-month pregnant Nancy. The state of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen revealed a brutal mutilation with a knife and hatchet, suggesting that the killer had removed the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Despite mounting evidence, Carlos refused to admit his involvement, providing contradictory statements and trying to shift the blame onto an unknown attacker. However, traces of Nancy's blood were found on his clothes and shoes, which he had attempted to wash off but failed to completely remove. Through diligent investigation, authorities were able to reconstruct the sequence of tragic events and the entire scenario of the crime, ultimately incriminating Carlos. Forensic experts have reconstructed the events of August 20th. After an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner, Nancy, in the kitchen, where bloodstains were later found on the floor and walls. Next, he moved Nancy's body to the bathroom, went shopping at a hardware store in the market, and then used a hatchet and large kitchen knife to dismember her body into 20 pieces. He placed the pieces in bags and loaded them into a cart. That night, he took the cart to a park, searching for secluded areas to dispose of the body parts. He followed a pre-planned route, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. The fate of the fetus removed from Nancy's body remains unknown. Carlos denied his guilt, claiming to have loved Nancy from the time of the murder until his arrest in Madrid. He used the money he stole from Nancy to fund his daily bar hopping across various cities. The investigation and search for evidence and witnesses took nearly 2 years, and the trial did not begin until July 2022. In November 2022, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence too lenient. Carlos was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison and ordered to pay €150,000 in compensation to Nancy's parents and daughters. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan grew up in Detroit, Michigan, where he received his education. At 20, he decided to serve his country and join the military. He was stationed at a base near Marquette, where he met Terry, a young teacher from Iron River. They became friends, bonding over their shared values and interests. Their friendship grew into a close relationship, but Christopher's military service didn't allow for a romantic relationship. When he left the military, he moved to Traverse City, but the distance didn't weaken their bond. In 2012, Christopher proposed a long-distance romantic relationship, and Terry agreed. They shared many common interests, including a love of nature and a desire for a peaceful lifestyle. They decided to live together in Iron River, where Christopher found a job at a factory. However, after 2 years, their passion faded and they parted ways amicably. Christopher moved out and began looking for a new place to live. He found a job in Asheville, North Carolina, and started a new chapter in his life. On October 14th, he told Terry he had taken the day off and suggested they meet up the next day for a walk. However, he failed to contact her the next day, and Terry became worried. After trying to reach him for several days, Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The police reassured her that people sometimes disappear and then return, but Terry was concerned. At the police station, Terry told investigators that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina and might have started a new life, cutting ties with his past. However, to avoid speculation, a detailed investigation was launched. The police identified the company where Christopher had started working and contacted an employee, but surprisingly, no information about Christopher could be obtained, as he hadn't shown up to work in 10 days. Search efforts were then focused on the local woods, where Christopher often took solo trips with specially trained dogs deployed to aid in the search. Unfortunately, no trace of him was found. Terry suggested searching Christopher's former apartment to rule out any accidents or potential clues to his whereabouts. Upon entering the apartment, detectives found it in disarray, with items scattered across the floor and open closets. Although it initially seemed like Christopher was simply a messy person, Terry knew him to be more organized. The detectives began to suspect that the disarray might be related to a crime. After inspecting the apartment, they decided to expand the search area. They eventually found Christopher's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. Inside the car, they found ordinary clothes and a piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. The route had no specific address, but detailed notes described the path, including turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry explained that Christopher, despite living in Iron River, wasn't familiar with the street names, so he wrote down directions in this way. The detectives followed the route, which led them to a house in a neighboring town. Upon knocking on the door, they met Jason Cochran, an overweight man, and his wife Kelly. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and found a piece of paper with their address in his abandoned car. Kelly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they were friends. Although Kelly hadn't been in contact with Christopher recently, she had tried to reach him via text messages in mid-October. She assumed he had started his new job in North Carolina and didn't respond. Kelly also mentioned Christopher's health issues, which might have led him to start anew. The investigators were puzzled by the route leading to the Cochran home and why it was in Christopher's car. Despite the lack of answers, the couple cooperated with the investigation. After further questioning, the detectives left the Cochran home and proceeded to interview Christopher's co-workers at the factory. There, they discovered that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which had been rumored for months. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance sparked a new lead when Kelly Cochran made a surprising statement. Investigators decided to re-question Kelly and her husband Jason to get to the bottom of their relationship. Kelly eventually admitted to having an affair with Christopher, but initially withheld the information because of her husband's presence. Kelly claimed that she and Jason had an open relationship and Jason was okay with her infidelity. However, Christopher's co-workers disputed this, saying that Jason did not approve of the affair and that the Cochran family did not have an open relationship. When Jason was questioned, he revealed that he was strongly opposed to his wife's infidelity, making him a suspect. However, the lack of concrete evidence meant that the investigators couldn't conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. Kelly and Jason were released from the police station, and the investigation continued for 5 months without a breakthrough. A new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden, took over the case and began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together after graduation. Despite their personality differences, they got married and started a swimming pool maintenance business. Jason handled most of the work, but the physical demands took a toll on his health, leaving him with back problems. When Jason's condition worsened, Kelly took over the business. During this time, Kelly sought ways to help her husband recover, including finding a medicinal plant that could help alleviate his back pain. However, the plant was banned in their state, so they moved to Michigan in 2014 to access it. In Michigan, Kelly and Jason got jobs at the same plant where Christopher worked. Kelly and Christopher became close friends, which was important to him given his relationship troubles with Terry. The prosecutors eventually obtained a search warrant for the Cochrans' home, but the search yielded no evidence linking them to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant find was a book written by Jason under a pseudonym inspired by video games. The title of the book caught their attention, but its content was disturbing. The book described violent murder scenes targeting everyone who had ever wronged Jason. The detectives read it thoroughly and found a character that matched Christopher's profile exactly. This strengthened their suspicions about Jason, making them wonder if he wasn't making up the crimes, but instead drawing inspiration from real events he had committed. 3 weeks later, the police decided to conduct another search of the Cochran house, hoping to find evidence they might have missed the first time. However, when they arrived, they found the house empty and the family had moved to Indiana. This made the investigators anxious, as they feared they might not find the crucial evidence they had been searching for months, particularly DNA samples from the suspects. Michigan police contacted their Indiana counterparts to help collect DNA samples from the Cochrans. The Indiana police officers went to the Cochrans' new home, and Jason and Kelly did not object to the procedure, as there was no concrete evidence linking them to the murder. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Kelly called the police, frantic, saying her husband Jason was unresponsive. When the rescue team arrived, they found Kelly in a panic, trying to obstruct the doctors. Jason was sitting in a chair, his face severely burned as if from extreme overheating. The doctors confirmed his death, and the body was sent for forensic examination. During the search of the Cochrans' new home, an officer discovered a syringe needle near the bed. The forensic report revealed that Jason's death was not due to drug abuse, as initially suspected, but rather strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. This discovery turned Jason, the prime suspect in Christopher's kidnapping, into a victim himself. The investigation became even more complex, and forensic experts shifted their focus to Kelly Cochran, who now became the prime suspect in both Christopher's disappearance and her husband's murder. Kelly was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly if she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to her husband or was involved in his death. However, despite the pressure, Kelly did not confess to either crime. Months later, the investigators still lacked concrete evidence to prove Kelly's guilt and justify an arrest. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who insisted that illegal drugs could not have caused Jason's death, as he knew his friend well and would have been informed about any changes in his life. Jason had been using medicinal herbs to alleviate his chronic back pain. However, his friend Walter noticed a significant change in his behavior around March last year. Jason confided in Walter about the mounting pressure from the Iron River police, who suspected him and his wife Kelly of involvement in a man's disappearance. The ordeal had taken a toll on Jason, leaving him depressed and even suicidal, which required intensive treatment. Walter observed that Kelly had begun to exert more control over Jason's life, making him increasingly anxious and withdrawn. Jason would avoid social gatherings when Kelly was around, and their video game sessions had become a thing of the past. These observations proved crucial in the investigation, helping detectives understand the dynamics within the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason's death was by strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to lure Kelly into a trap. The plan involved using Walter as bait to prompt Kelly into making a mistake. Walter agreed to play along, and on March 12, 2016, he called Kelly under police surveillance. He pretended that Jason had given him a letter containing vital information, which Kelly was supposed to send to the police if anything happened to Jason. However, Kelly suddenly told Walter to drop the idea, catching both him and the police off guard. Despite this, detectives still lacked concrete evidence, and Kelly continued to deny her involvement during subsequent interrogations. On April 26, 2016, Kelly seemingly evaded the authorities, prompting a federal manhunt. Walter, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and fearful that Kelly might evade justice and potentially target him. The police eventually tracked Kelly's phone to the West Coast, and on April 28th, they arrested her at her cousin's home in Wingo, Kentucky. Once in custody, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher Rain, revealing that she had wanted to leave her husband and start a new life with him. However, when Jason discovered her infidelity, their situation escalated, and Kelly was bound by a pact they had made on their wedding night, obliging her to kill her lover if her cheating was exposed. Kelly Cochran claimed she never intended to follow through on an agreement she made with her husband, Jason, but he was determined to see it through. The agreement was a threat to kill Christopher Rain, Kelly's lover, if she didn't end the affair. Kelly didn't want to do it, but she ultimately helped Jason commit the crime. On October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house while her husband was away. Kelly offered him dinner and intimacy, and they went upstairs to the bedroom. However, Jason suddenly appeared, panicked and holding a rifle. Without hesitation, he shot Christopher in the head, killing him instantly. Under Jason's direction, Kelly helped dismember Christopher's body using a hacksaw, detaching his limbs and head from his torso. They placed the remains in trash bags and dumped them in the woods near Crystal Falls. They also drove Christopher's car away from the house to avoid suspicion and thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. Kelly later confessed to her role in the crime, saying she wanted revenge against Jason for forcing her to end her affair with Christopher. She was deeply in love with Christopher and felt Jason had deprived her of happiness. Months later, on February 22, 2016, Kelly killed Jason by suffocating him after giving him a lethal dose of medication. She then helped the police find Christopher's remains, which were buried in the woods near Crystal Falls. A team of investigators and a canine unit searched the area and eventually found a human skull with a bullet hole, confirming it was Christopher's severed head. A .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses likely belonging to Reagan were found at the scene. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains, finally solving the 2-year-old missing person case. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Regan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind both crimes and that her motive was rage and jealousy. Christopher viewed their relationship as casual, but Kelly genuinely loved him and wanted a future together. When Christopher refused to commit, Kelly decided to kill him, making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession in court. However, Kelly claimed she was being abused by her jealous husband, who had planned and committed the crime. She said he hid in the basement, caught the lovers off guard, and then shot Christopher in a rage. Kelly claimed Jason suggested dismembering the body and coerced her into helping by threatening to kill her. This version raised doubts about Kelly's guilt, but the jury still found her guilty of premeditated murder. Kelly was sentenced to life without parole. Jason Cochran's case was settled with a plea agreement, and Kelly received an additional 65 years in prison. Kelly was sent to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Michigan, where she is serving her sentence and regrets that her personal life didn't work out. In a phone interview, Kelly said, "I tried to do what I thought was right. I got married." She also shared, "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work while my husband played computer games." In prison, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes, claiming she and Jason committed more crimes and that Christopher was just one of their many victims. However, Kelly's claims are difficult to verify, and there is no concrete evidence to support them. Her brother has also heard similar claims, but there is no evidence to back them up. Detective Jeremy Ogden is investigating the details, hoping to find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran.